Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Loving obeisances unto the Supreme Being Vasudeva, who is everything there is. Janmadyasya yato anvayaditaratascha artheshu abhigyaswarat. Tene brahmahridaya adikavaye muhyanti yatsurayah. Tejo vari mridam yatha vinimayo yatra trisargo mrisha. Dhamna swena sada nirastakohakam satyam param dhimahi. We meditate upon the transcendent absolute being from whom springs forth this universe. He is present in all that exists and yet distinct from everything. He is fully conscious and totally independent. He revealed to the first seer Brahma the import of Vedic wisdom. The material creation, made of threefold gunas, appears in him as though real, like water in a mirage. Being eternally self-effulgent, he is ever free of the illusion maya of the material world. We meditate upon him, the Supreme Being. Nigamakalpataror galitam phalam shukamukad amrita drava sanyutam pibata bhagavatam rasamalayam muhuraho rasika bhuvi bhavukaha. O devotees who relish a taste for divine love, Bhagavatam is the fully ripened fruit of the wish-yielding tree of Vedas, flowing as immortal nectar from Shuka Brahmarshi. Go on drinking the sweet nectar day after day. So now we are entering the fourth chapter of the sixth Skandha of Bhagavatam. One thing to note, today is the 108th episode of Bhagavatam, which we started on Akshaya Tritiya, and as beautifully arranged, the 108th episode happens to be the day of Janmashtami. Today is the eve of Krishna Janmashtami, the advent of Bhagavan Krishna on earth. So by Bhagavan's grace, we have come to the 108th episode. 108 is a very special number. We already saw how 27 stars with 4 quarters make 108, and therefore 108 involves a complete movement of all the stars, which is to say, it is a complete movement of time in one sense, and therefore all the rosaries are made of 108 beads, and the number 108 is considered sacred in all traditions, and we have come to this 108th episode on the sacred day of Janmashtami by divine arrangement. One more point is we have been chanting the 3 verses and their meaning every day. Since we have done it for 108 days, I hope the meaning is already very clear. So going forward, we'll only chant the verses. The verses are very beautiful and the very sound of them is purifying. So we'll chant the 3 verses, and the meaning is already been repeated 108 times, that I would hope we are all completely having it in the heart, that the essence of it is that everything comes from him, everything stays in him, everything goes back into him. He alone is. And the one who listens with this taste of devotion and love can transcend the net of Maya, and that taste of love is what Bhagavatam offers us. So with this, we enter the 108th episode. Now we are starting another story based on a question by Parikshit. Parikshit asks, now that the story of Ajamila, the great story of amazing grace, as well as the conversation between Yama and his messengers, where Yama instructs them, is over. Now Parikshit asks to Shuka Brahmarshi, O great sage, you have instructed everything about the Manvantara, the first Manvantara. Now please tell me how it proceeded, because that was left. If you remember, in the 4th Skandha, we saw the lineage of Uttanapada coming through Dhruva, Prithu, Prachina, Barhi and Prachetas, and then we were told that Prachetas had a son Daksha, who was a reincarnation of the Daksha who was beheaded by Shiva. And then it was said that this same Daksha was the Prajapati for the subsequent Manvantara called Chakshusha Manvantara. So Parikshit, being a very keen listener, wants to now know how the Chakshusha Manvantara proceeded by the Prajapati Daksha. So he asks this question. So Shuka Brahmarshi responds to him. He says, when the 10 Prachetas, so if you remember the story, the Prachetas were asked by their father Prachina Barhi to go and do penance to have children. They did penance, they got the darshan of first Shiva and then Bhagavan Hari, and then they also got the darshan of Narada towards the end of their life. But before that, after they came out of that lake where they did penance and they got the darshan of Shiva and Sri Hari, they were then told to take a wife, and by that they had a son Daksha. So that story was left right there. Then we moved to Priyavrata and his lineage, and which was all part of the first Manvantara. Now, this Daksha is the one who's responsible for the following Manvantara, which is the Chakshusha Manvantara. So, the story continues. First, Shuka Brahmarshi reminds by saying the 10 Prachetas, sons of Prachina Parhi, emerged from the lake after having done penance. And when they came out of the lake, they saw a lot of trees. Essentially, the whole kingdom was covered with trees, because what happened was by the time their father Prachina Barhi had left for forest on the instructions of Narada. So we also saw that Prachina Barhi was engaged in rituals of all kinds. And then Narada came and instructed him by giving the story of Puranjana and thereby telling him the futility of rituals and to engage in sadhana. So, listening to Narada's instructions, Prachina Barhi left and the Prachetas hadn't come back yet. So, the kingdom was filled with chaos, anarchy, forests everywhere, and trees growing here and there. So, they got very angry, it is said, and they started burning the trees down. And this was not like by the devatas. So the devata Soma, which is representing the moon, it is said, spoke to the Prachetas and said, you ought not to show any anger towards these trees, because these trees are growing on their own and they are actually a source of life. So this is a beautiful instruction on the need to taking care of trees that comes in Bhagavatam. The moon deity Soma says that it is the Supreme Lord that pervades all the trees and plants and everything, and all beings get their life from trees. It is from trees that flowers and fruits and everything comes, by which animals eat, and it is animals which in turn provide food for humans through milk and through helping with agriculture and so on. Therefore, trees are the very foundation of the food chain itself, and they also produce clean air and everything. Therefore, it is very important for you to take care of the trees now that you are going to become the king, rather than burn them down. So please follow the path of the virtuous, which is the path shown by your own lineage, your father and forefathers, and recognize that you have to take care of the trees and the whole kingdom, just as parents take care of children, eyelashes take care of eye, husband of wife, king ought to take care of people. And this is the same way a wise man takes care of the ignorant and the householder takes care of mendicants. So there is duty and responsibility for everyone, parents to take care of children, and similarly householders to take care of mendicants who have surrendered everything, or the wise to take care of the ignorant, and similarly the king has to take care of his kingdom, including the trees and nature. And therefore it is said by them, by Soma, that Sri Hari, the Supreme Lord, dwells as the inner controller in all beings, and therefore if you take care of trees, that is to worship Bhagavan himself. So one has to recognize the indwelling presence of the Lord in all aspects of nature, and that's the right way to worship Bhagavan. So this is again a beautiful instruction to Prachetas, and by way of them to all of us, that the right duty of government, of kings, of people, of everyone, is to see nature as not something to exploit or not something to enjoy, but as inherently one with the divine, as the essence of our own being is what permeates all of nature, and therefore to give and take with love and take care of nature. So that's the instruction they are given. And then finally, it concludes by saying, one who subdues all kinds of emotions, including anger, by inquiring within, by thereby reaching the cavity of the heart, realizes his own self. It says, Antar Dehishu Bhutanam Atma Aste Harir Ishvaraha. Hari, the Supreme Lord, abides in the heart as one's own self, and therefore one who, through inquiry, penetrates into his own heart, discards the false idea of individuality with respect to the body, the mind, the senses, the intellect, and so on. He comes then to recognize that all there is the one supreme being in the heart, and therefore recognizing this, you please now go and marry this woman. There is this woman Marisha who is born off the trees, as it were, that is, she is one with nature, and so it is said that they should marry. And this part we saw already too, that the Prachetas married Marisha and they had a son, Daksha, who was reincarnated from the original version where he was beheaded by Shiva because of transgressing Shiva. We saw the whole story there. So it is said that the Prachetas gave birth to Daksha through this woman, and then now Daksha is given the task of multiplying creation, because Daksha is a Prajapati. Prajapati means one who is father of creation, and therefore he is now given the task of multiplying creation for the next Manvantara. So one Manvantara lasts a long time. So the first Manvantara, Manvantara stands for Manu Antara. That is, when the Manu changes, then the Manvantara. Manu and Antara, due to Sandhi rule in Sanskrit, becomes Manvantara. So when the first Manu is there, that's first Manvantara. Then the Manu changes, and therefore the new Manu, the Antara of the Manu, causes Manvantara. So the next Manvantara, and so on. So Swayambhuva Manu was the first Manu, and it was called Swayambhuva Manvantara. This is called Chakshusha Manvantara, in which Daksha is now praying. And so Daksha, being tasked with procreating beings in this Manvantara, he recognizes that he has to propitiate the Supreme Lord, pray to him in order to go about this task. So we see again and again in Bhagavatam that just as the Prachetas did, just as Brahma himself set the example, the task of creation, which is essentially the task everyone is engaged in at all levels, whatever work we do, from small to big, whatever we create, it is important to invoke the Supreme Lord and do with divine consciousness. Otherwise, what we put out becomes something that's only disturbance to society, which is what happens a lot. So whether children are produced, or whether even small pieces of art are produced, or whether even a food is prepared, anything that's prepared, if it's done with divine consciousness, the right result comes and everybody profits from it in a harmonious way. So in this way, Daksha propitiates the Lord by going to Vindhya mountains. There is a lake there, it is said, called Aghamarshana. Aghamarshana literally means a lake that burns sins. Agha means sin, and Marshana means that which burns sins. So there he goes and takes bath 3 times a day, and this is a very powerful holy place, it is said. And there he practices tapas, asceticism, and he renders a prayer. The prayer is called Hamsa Gohya, and that prayer is given here by Shuka Brahmarshi. It's a beautiful prayer. The Prajapati Daksha says, I offer salutations to the Supreme Lord, who is pure consciousness and who brings forth both Jiva and Prakriti. So he nicely lays out the nature of Bhagavan as the one who is the source of both Jiva, that is the light of consciousness reflected within the body, and Prakriti, which is the body that includes the intellect and mind and senses and so on. So the Jiva can be seen as the I thought, the reflection of pure consciousness that is localized as I thought is Jiva, and that Jiva along with Prakriti, that is all of nature that is there in one's own body through the various aspects of physical elements and thoughts and intellect and all of that, together forms what we call an apparent individual. And he says both of these all aspects of nature that forms the body and mind, and the sense of I, the I thought, which is the Jiva, both of them have their source in you, the Supreme Lord, who is beyond all the three gunas and whose nature cannot be perceived by anyone. Therefore, I offer my obeisance unto the Supreme Lord, who is always there as the constant companion. So, within the body, along with the I thought, as the very source of the I thought remains the pure being. So we are normally identified with the I thought, and then the I thought goes about identifying with the body and with the mind and intellect and various other constructs. But if the I thought recognizes that it itself is only there because of the source of itself, which is the pure supreme being, the pure consciousness in the heart, then it will be abiding in its own source and not being disturbed by being pulled outwardly. So Daksha says, this pure consciousness is there in the heart of everyone, right next to the Jiva as its own source, right next to the I thought, or right behind the I thought, whichever way we see it. And yet the I thought, not recognizing it, goes outwardly and rather than going inwardly, and it is unable to perceive its own source. But the reality is the body, all the vital airs, the five pranas, the senses, intellect, the ego, the gross elements, the subtle elements, all of these are nothing but pure Brahman, and it is all known by the I thought except itself. So the I thought is able to perceive all of this. The I thought can see the body, see the senses, the mind, the intellect, the ego, and it's even aware of the I thought, but the I thought cannot perceive its source. It can only surrender to its source. And therefore, that source from which I thought emerges, which cannot be perceived by the I thought can only perceive all that is external to itself. The I thought can also be aware of itself as I thought, but it cannot perceive its own source. So he says here, the conscious Jiva knows all these elements, and but it does not know the all-knowing Lord who is the source of this very I thought. And this source I offer my obeisance to, which is the pure supreme being that is revealed only in a pure mind, which is not caught in the web of names and forms. So the absolute existence which manifests as names and forms and which is bewildering, when is seen that all these names and forms are simply appearances and not real, then alone the pure mind, which is not caught in the web of names and forms, can perceive him, not by any other way. And therefore the wise who perceive him are those who have the most purified intellect, and they see that he is installed in their very heart, even though he is veiled by all these various attributes. So when we say perceive again, it is not perceivable as we already saw like any object. It means to simply surrender. So the I thought can perceive all the outer objects, but it cannot perceive its own source. So as Daksha says here, when the intellect is purified, when the mind is purified, and therefore the I thought is not drawn outwardly to identify with the mind and the intellect and all the rest, then the I thought subsides and surrenders to its own source, and by surrendering it perceives the source, which is Bhagavan. Therefore, he says that such great beings who are able to surrender, the true wise ones, the true jnanis, the true bhaktas, they are able to recognize the source just as one can recognize fire inside the wood. So the fire is hidden inside a wood, but if one is able to do the right thing, the fire comes out. Similarly, the one who has got pure intellect, by completely surrendering and subsiding the I thought within the heart, is able to realize this pure beingness. And therefore he says that he is realized as pure joy, and all that is manifested, when they are all negated, when everything is negated, then what remains is him as pure joy, pure happiness, Ananda. May he shower his grace on me, because he is not describable by words. He says anything described by words, intellect, senses, mind, speech, none of that can be his essential nature, because all of them are coming outwardly and he is the very source of everything. And then he says a nice verse, he says, wherever, from whatever cause, through whatever means, whichever task is done in however way by whoever, everything is Brahman. He says nicely, Yasmin yato yena cha yaya yasya yasmai yad yo yatha kurute karyate cha tad Brahma. So he says that anything, whatever is done by whoever, in whichever way, through whatever means, with whatever cause, with whatever instrument, anything that is there. So it's a nice poetic way of saying that all that there is the Supreme Brahman. He is the cause of all causes, and therefore every activity has its origin in him. He is the only source of all activities of all kinds. And therefore he says, hail to this all-pervading Supreme Being, possessed of endless virtues, and whose manifold potencies is the ground for even people to dispute. So people are always arguing between whether he has got form or no form, whether it's duality or non-duality. All these disputations and arguments, Daksha says, are themselves a product of the potency of the Lord. It is the intellect that comes forth from the source that comes forth as all these disputations, arguments, and people get endlessly lost in it. Then he says in a nice verse, there are two systems normally, yoga and Sankhya. Even Krishna speaks of these two in Bhagavad Gita. Sankhya is to go within, surrendering to the self completely and recognizing the heart as the pure being. Yoga is to, specifically Karma Yoga here, Karma Yoga is what's referred to as yoga, is to see, as we saw in the previous verse, see every task that is being done outwardly as done by Bhagavan, and therefore not having any sense of doership. And so these two are apparently different. One engaging in all kinds of activities while seeing all the activities as done by Bhagavan, one by surrendering within and thereby recognizing the very source of the I thought as Bhagavan. And yet he says both of these, though seemingly different, are exactly the same because they lead to the same source, which is pure Brahman. He says, Astiti nastiti cha vastu nishtayor ekasto binna viruddha dharmayoho avekshitam kinchana yoga sankhyayoho samam param hi anukulam brahmatat. It's a nice verse. It says that Brahman is the only basis of both who say Asti and Nasti. Asti means those who say this Brahman is the source of all activities. It is engaging in all these activities, and every activity that is done by Brahman, by God. Nasti is the one who says there are no activities, there is no names, no forms, it's all an illusion, nothing happens. So this is constantly a source of debate. There are those who say everything is Maya, there is no activity happening, it's all like a water in a mirage, it's all like a complete illusion, and there is only pure consciousness. And then there are those who are into the way of yoga who say that everything is happening by the power of the Supreme Lord. As we saw, all that happens by whatever motive, in whichever way, with whoever as the instrument, is all done by Bhagavan. And he says very beautifully, these two ways, though seemingly opposing each other, one says Asti, one says Nasti. That is, one says the world of happening is there, and the one says there is no world of happening, there is only pure consciousness. And yet he says both of them have their source in the same one Supreme Lord, and he can be realized in both ways. So this puts an end to dispute between people who argue between these two ways, because if one sincerely goes in either way, Daksha says one will realize the same truth, which is the Supreme Lord as the only ground of being, that is all there is. And therefore he says, may that Almighty and Supreme Lord bestow his grace on me, who has come, even though free of any name and form, he appears with name and form for the purpose of bestowing his grace. And he has come as all these various avatars we know, Krishna and Ram and all the rest, because of simply bestowing grace. He says, Yo anugrahartam bhajatam padamulam anamarupo Bhagavan anantaha. He says, Anamarupo, he is without a name, without form, Bhagavan, but Anugrahartam, for the purpose of grace, Namani Rupani cha Janma Karma Bir Bheje Samahyam Paramam Prasidatu. He is taking on names and forms out of sheer grace, and his Janma and Karma. He takes on activities and birth and activities, and may this Supreme Lord bestow His grace upon me. That's why Krishna says in the Gita, Janma Karma Cha Me Divyam Yomam Veti Tattvatahat. Today being Janmashtami, it's a beautiful verse, very appropriate, that Daksha points out here, that Krishna appears as Bhagavan, taking birth and engaging in all these activities, and all these are only for the purpose of grace, and bestowing grace through his name and form, appearing as Krishna and doing all the various Leelas pastimes, is this pure Brahman, pure consciousness, who has taken this wonderful avatar, and we offer our obeisances unto him, Daksha says. And therefore he says, may this Supreme Lord, who is the inner controller of all beings, who appears infinitely diverse in all these various beings, may he bestow his grace on me. So this is such a beautiful prayer called Hamsa Guhya by Daksha. Listening to this, Shuka says Bhagavan is very pleased, and Bhagavan himself appears in front of Daksha, and he appears in his transcendental form, which has been described many times, with a beautiful dark cloud-like appearance, yellow silk clothing, and very pleasant face, and beautiful graceful eyes, forest flowers on his neck, and gems and all that is Pita Vasa Ghanashyamaha Prasanna Vadanekshanaha Vanamala Nimitango Lasat Srivatsa Kaustubaha. So this beautiful way he appears, and he is so graceful, he is so charming. He's got his Shankha Chakra Gada Padma, that is the conch shell, the Sudarshan wheel, the mace, and the lotus flower, and he looks so glowing and transcendent, and Daksha falls at his feet completely like a stick. It says, Nanama Dandavat Bhumau Prahrishtatma Prajapatihi. So this is the way to offer obeisance, falling on the ground like a stick. So he falls like a stick, Dandavat, and he offers his obeisance to Janardana, the another name of Sri Krishna, Bhagavan. So Bhagavan beautifully addresses Daksha here and says, oh blessed Daksha, you have done great asceticism, and your prayer is very beautiful, and you have solely devoted your love and reverence to me. He says, Shraddhaya Matparaya Mai Bhavam Param Gatah. With Shraddha, with reverence, you have directed your entire attention to me. Therefore, I am pleased, and this tapas is conducive to the growth of creation. That's the purpose of Daksha doing this tapas. And so Bhagavan says this tapas is very conducive for creation. Brahma himself, Shiva himself, all the created beings, Manus, everyone engages in tapas, because he says tapas is my very heart. And then he says, so he says, Tapo me hridayam, my very heart is tapas, my worship is my body, mental activity is my exterior, all the sacrifices are the members of my body, and the merits of the sacrifices are the mind. So Bhagavan symbolically describes that the very heart of Bhagavan, of God, is asceticism, or total dedicated surrender with one pointed focus. That is revealing him, and therefore he is the heart. And worship is the body, because as body covers the heart, it is the external worship by offering everything we do. Worship means not necessarily ritually. In fact, it is more importantly offering everything we do. As Krishna says in another verse in the Gita, Yat karoshi yat juhnasi yat tapas yat juhoshi yat tapasyasi. Whatever you do, whatever you offer, whatever sacrifice you do, kurushva madarpanam. He says, just surrender it unto me. And that is true worship, true offering. So when we do that, then he says, I reveal myself as the only truth there is. He says, the next verse is very beautiful. He says, I alone existed before creation, and nothing else was. So he says, Ahameva asam eva agre na anyat kincha antaram bahihi. This is the exact same verse, the beginning of it, that was given to Brahma as part of Chatushloki Bhagavatam, the very essence of the entire Bhagavatam, captured in 4 verses. The first verse is repeated here, Ahameva asam eva agre na anyat kincha antaram bahihi. I alone existed before creation, and it is out of me that whole of creation has manifested, and there is nothing other than me. Everything here is come from me, and it dissolves back unto me. And therefore, Bhagavan says, Brahma also brought forth creation in the beginning, coming out of my cosmic being by engaging in tapas, and thereby he was able to bring forth creation. Similarly, you shall also do. And therefore he says, go forth and marry the daughter of Panchajana. Her name is Asikni, and by marrying her, you can beget children and thereby go forth and multiply creation. This is what Bhagavan gives him as a beautiful instruction to Daksha. And here one important thing Bhagavan says is, when nothing was there, ahameva asameva agre, when there was nothing, he says there was only complete inactivity, the sleep of pure consciousness. It is called Yoga Nidra. And from that came forth the cosmic being, and from the cosmic being came forth creation. And in a very micro way of that, that's the macro cosmic level. On a daily basis, this happens to each of us when we come out of sleep as well. When we are in sleep and we come out, the I thought wakes up, which is the principle of Jiva, and then there is cognition of the world, and the whole world comes forth. So this very principle at the macro cosmic level is what is pure consciousness, which is Bhagavan in Yoga Nidra, in causal sleep, from which comes forth all of creation through the power of Maya. So Bhagavan says, this way Brahma created the whole universe coming forth from me. So the creative principle that comes forth from Bhagavan as part of Maya is Brahma. Just as in our own day-to-day basis, we have a small creative principle that comes out when we wake up from deep sleep and engages in activities. At the cosmic level also, there is the creative principle that comes forth from pure consciousness, and that is Brahma. And he created all of this through tapas. And therefore he says to Daksha, you shall also do the same now by engaging in austerity and with a very pious wife, marrying her and begetting children. Having spoken this, Lord Sri Hari, the Supreme Being, unmanifested from that spot, and Daksha was left spellbound, eyes full of tears, and very pleased, and now very gratified at having gotten the darshan of the Supreme Lord. With this chapter ends. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.